We are here to discuss the UN Pact for the Future and why it's a breakthrough for multilateral collaboration. We are very grateful to the Delphi Forum for including this discussion in the agenda. We think it's very timely given it's the 10th anniversary to talk about the future of our world, and we are delighted to have Sophie Howe here for the first time speaking publicly in Greece about her amazing work as a Future Generations Commissioner in Wales. So before diving into the UN Pact for the Future, we would like to hear from Sophie about her incredible work there. Please.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you. Wales, a relatively small nation, just over 3 million people, part of the UK, but was the first country in the world to legislate to protect the interests of future generations and to appoint an independent Future Generations Commissioner to oversee the implementation of that legislation. Why did we do that? Because like many countries, Wales is facing many challenges. Many of the issues that we need to address, the big global challenges like climate change, like increasing wealth inequality, like how do we ensure that our children and young people are equipped in schools to meet the challenges of the future, get the jobs of the future, have lives well lived. Increasing issues around polarization and populism and shifting kind of democratic systems. But the way in which the world tends to work and the way in which Wales was working in parallel with that was that really we were just responding to crises and disaster, and we wanted to shift that to changing the way our country operated by design and not by disaster. So our legislation first of all set out a national conversation with citizens where we pose the question to citizens, what is the Wales you want to leave behind to your children, your grandchildren and future generations to come? And that's quite an unusual conversation for governments to have with their citizens. We tend to only have conversations about what's happening in the here and now. We gave the ability for citizens to set out their vision for the future, and we took what citizens said and formed that vision into 7 long-term wellbeing goals, which are not just set out in an aspirational policy document of the government, which might change when the next election comes, but which actually is set out in law. So it doesn't change from one electoral cycle to the next. And that vision, through 7 interconnected wellbeing goals, essentially sets out the North Star for Wales. You wouldn't think it was revolutionary for a country to have a long-term vision, would you? But it's quite revolutionary. Most countries in the world do not have that. And that really requires our government, all levels, from our national government right down to the local municipality level and all of our institutions in between, to demonstrate how their actions are seeking to meet those long-term goals and how they're ensuring that their actions are meeting today's needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And that is critically important because if we look at those people yet to be born, if we look 50,000 years to the future, there are around about 6.75 trillion people yet to be born. And the actions that those of us, those 8 billion of us on planet Earth at the moment, take in this decade, in this critical decade, will determine the lives that those people lead, or sadly, with the existential threat that we're facing, don't leave. So that is the sort of process that we have in Wales, and it's a process which is now being looked at, followed and adopted both at the UN and by many other countries across the world.
Exactly. So I think that it's a good point now to explain how the UN was also influenced by your story in Wales and promoted the common agenda that led to the Summit of the Future and the adoption of the Pact and the groundbreaking Declaration of Future Generations, which is like our Bible now in our movement to promote long-termism in policymaking. So give us the story about the Pact for the Future.
So there are many challenges in multilateralism at the moment. That's probably the subject of, well, I know it's popped up in almost every session that I've been in here in terms of the various global challenges that we're facing and the challenge that faces to multilateralism. But what we can see on the positive side is that there was a real breakthrough in multilateralism in September of last year, when the UN passed a groundbreaking declaration on future generations and a pact for the future. And that is made up of a number of different components, a pact, a digital pact, a declaration on future generations, and also some work around financing reform in the UN system and so on. But particularly on the declaration for future generations, this is really the world saying that we recognise that across the globe, in every system of governance, we almost discount the interests of future generations. We treat future generations as some sort of we ship them off to some distant colony that we don't need to worry about. And the world is saying that actually that is not right, and we do now need to take action. And the world has signed up to some quite significant commitments. So in that declaration for future generations, the world member states have signed up to, amongst other things, undertaking a whole of government approach to the coordination, including at the national and local levels, on the assessment, development, implementation and evaluation of policies that safeguard the interests of future generations. Now, if you take that literally, that permeates every aspect of what a government does. And that is essentially what we have done in Wales. Every decision in Wales, taken at every level, has to be assessed against achieving those long-term goals and achieving and testing it for intergenerational fairness. And that is really where the UN now is trying to move, where member states have signed up to doing that. How it will be implemented in different countries will be different depending on different cultural and other circumstances. But we can already see that a number of countries across the world, so let's start at even at an EU level. Ursula von der Leyen, just a few months ago, appointed the first EU Commissioner for Intergenerational Fairness, Commissioner Mikulov, who has a mandate to put a intergenerational fairness strategy throughout the EU. We can see that there are bills in the Irish Parliament, in the Scottish Parliament. There are moves to implement a Future Generations Bill in Denmark, in Norway. We hope that maybe Greece might be the next to be a front runner in this agenda. And further afield, this week the Kenyan Senate is coming together in a retreat with 50 senators from the Senate to look at how they can embed a committee of the future in their Senate to ensure that their work is embedding intergenerational fairness. Later on today, I'm flying off to Australia, where there is a bill in the Australian Federal Parliament based on the Welsh bill and on delivering the UN Pact for the future. So this really, the call to action is there is an absolute imperative for us to be demonstrating that we are acting today for a better tomorrow, that there is a better way of doing politics, policy and governance, and that has to account for the interests of future generations, and that really we need to build this allegiance of front runners in the field.
Yes, wonderful. So I would like to refer a bit more how we met. Over the last 1.5 years, I had the pleasure to participate in the Futures Pioneers Network that you lead in the context of the School of International Futures. So it's a cohort of public officials who are like champions, early adopters of this agenda. It's really inspiring to hear stories from countries like Portugal or Denmark or Spain, who are really trying to move this forward institutionally within their countries. Can you give us a bit more details about one of those
So what we identified in Wales, and indeed we're identifying across a range of different countries, is that there are many champions for this work in the system, and I call them the frustrated champions. So these are people in the system. They might be civil servants, they might be politicians, they might be people working in NGOs, who for many years have been able to see that there is a better way of doing policy. And they might be the doctors who are treating more and more patients for preventable conditions because we failed to invest in a long-term preventative approach. They might be the highways engineers who are building yet another road because we failed to invest in public transport and the road they built 15 years ago is already congested again. They might be the social workers who are seeing one generation of families come into the social care system to another because we've not intervened early enough in early childhood development. So these people are frustrated by the way in which public policy is putting sticking plasters on issues rather than getting to the root causes. But these people are often isolated. They're often trying to change a system which is endemically short term. If we think about the way that our systems operate, what is the main measure that we tend to use to judge the success of a country? It's GDP. And actually, GDP doesn't tell us anything about the physical health of a population. It doesn't tell us anything about the role of caring. It doesn't tell us anything about what we're doing in terms of addressing the climate emergency and some of these big existential threats. So what this Pioneers Network is doing is identifying those champions in the system, whether they be government officials or politicians, and currently those champions are across 50 different nations in the world, and bringing them together to share learning. And again, what we can see is that those champions are starting to work to advance future generations' thinking in their own contexts. And the lessons that we are learning so far in terms of what is working successfully in different countries. We work on the basis of what we call the Future Generations Prism. So to advance this sort of thinking in countries, you need three elements, 3 points of the prism, if you like. First of all, we need to engage citizens, civil society, we need to engage the media, we need to engage academia in holding our politicians and our system to account on how they're acting for the long term and not just doing endemically short-term policy making. Secondly, we need to find those political champions, and we see in many countries across the world there are politicians taking legislation forward, there are champions in ministers, in different governments and so on, attempting to shift into this long-term thinking. And then the third part is the system. So here I'm talking about the machinery of government, our systems, the capacity and capability of our government officials to think to the long term, because I don't know if there's any civil servants or government officials or even those working in corporates in the audience today, but I can bet my bottom dollar you've never been on a foresight course, or you've never been trained in long-term thinking or anticipatory governance, or you're not necessarily applying long-term trends and future scenarios to the way in which you're taking decisions on a daily basis. And that's not a criticism of you, that's a criticism of the system, which doesn't accommodate and facilitate that to happen. So this Pioneers Network is really aiming to move the needle on that and share the learning between these different countries and the different actions that are being taken.
Wonderful. So yes, I would like to push a little bit more on the citizen engagement aspect. And we have to really understand why this is important, because to talk about the future, it has to be owned by the society, it has to be owned by the citizens. How do you think this can be embedded in this interplay?
Well, in our legislation in Wales, there are 5, alongside these 7 long-term wellbeing goals, there are 5 principles for decision-making. So this is the test or the approach that public institutions have to take. So they're demonstrating the long-term impact. You consider the long-term impact of the things that you do, seeking to prevent problems from occurring or from getting worse, integrating your actions, so recognising that everything's connected to everything, collaboration, so working together across boundaries, across ministries, shifting away from silo-based working. And the 5th, and possibly most important principle, involvement. Involving citizens in a decision-making process. And it's something which generally governments are rubbish at. We exist, and I say this as a former politician and a former government official, we exist in our ivory towers, and there is a disconnect between what we do there and what we think is best for citizens and what citizens actually want. And generally that's only tested if you're in a democracy once every 3 to 5 years in an election. But actually citizens are their own experts. Citizens are experts on what might work, what might not work. And where we engage citizens, we definitely come up with better policy solutions, but we also address this real big challenge that we're facing at the moment, which is around polarisation, around dissatisfaction. We are in an absolute crisis in democracy in terms of rapidly decreasing trust in institutions. And the worst possible thing that we can do is to sit in our ivory towers and think that we have the solutions to that without engaging citizens. So again, across the world, we see different models around citizen panels, around participatory budgeting. In Wales, we've lowered the voting age to 16. We have an elected biannual election for a youth parliament. We have a range of different mechanisms to engage citizens. But this is a real crisis that if we do not start to address this proper, I talk about engagement, but I'm actually talking about involvement, which is a much deeper sense of citizen participation. If we don't start to address this spiralling effect of polarisation, populism, and a breakdown in democracy is only going to accelerate.
Yes, absolutely. So I would like to come to Greece now a little. Since you were here today and yesterday, you heard some of the discussions about regional development, and you met with some key people in the executive. So what would be your best advice if we wanted to see Greece, as you said, moving forward to this direction? Where would you start?
Well, I mean, I think that, obviously you are still, paying the price, if you like, or feeling the effects of the financial crisis. And I think there's a need for Greece to have a conversation around what do you want the future to look like? And that should be a citizen-based conversation. What is the new Greece that you are trying to create? And we know sometimes we can put that in the context of challenges. We know that here in Greece, you've got challenges around an ageing population. You've got challenges in terms of unemployment and particularly participation of women in the labour market. There are challenges around early childhood development. But let's think about how we turn those challenges into opportunities. What is the vision that we want to create to give every child the best start in life? To be connecting that to how we enable people to grow up in a healthy and clean environment. That connects to the green transition, the sorts of jobs that can be created in a green transition. And if we start to think about that caring society, a caring society helps women's participation in the labour market in particular, and also helps to address the needs of an ageing population. So I think there's something here around those, as I said, those 5 principles for decision making. How can we frame the future of Greece in terms of making sure that we are setting that long-term vision, that we are acting now to prevent future challenges and crises, be that in terms of how we meet care needs of ageing population, how we meet pension needs, whatever it might be, how do we prevent that? And how do we really start to reform our government systems to recognise that all of those things are interconnected and interrelated. And we really need every part of government at all levels coming together, and the private sector and civil society really working in tandem to do that.
Wonderful. So I could make many more questions to you, but I think we should ask our friends here if anyone wants to ask a question or has a comment. Covered it all. Okay, so I think we're good. Thank you very much for listening. And can you show, please, the QR code with a... There is a report by the School of International Futures about long-term governance, which showcases all the work that Sophie has been doing, and you can have more ideas about how to bring this to country level and institutional level. Thank you very much.